All right. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everybody here today. I'm Alan White again. I'm a chemist. I worked at Eastman for 30 years. I've been a follower of Christ since I was 13, I believe. And so, as you can tell, that's quite a long time ago. But I really enjoy putting science and the Bible together and helping folks like you understand how it fits together. Because it really does. And so that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk about one of the more difficult subjects today, that you all asked for, is talking about radiometric dating and the age of the earth. Okay? Now, I'm going to bring it down to a level that I'm hoping that you can understand. If I'm starting to go way over your head, raise your hand and I'll try to bring it down to a level that you can understand, all right? Okay, all right, I got it, all right. So I've already lost some people, okay. So anyway, but I'll explain what radiometric dating is, and we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about why that evidence people use. There are some people out there that believe, okay, that, let me back up, that believe that radiometric dating has disproved the Bible. Okay, that's not true, but a lot of people believe that. I'm going to explain to you today why they think that's true and why they're misguided in that regard. Anyway, so this is an important issue, and it may be an issue that you've struggled with, and I'll talk about why that is in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about how important this issue is to secular scientists, the age of the earth or the age of the universe, okay? The age of the earth is critical to the theory of evolution, okay? Now, why is that? Well, because we don't see evolution. We know that evolution can't happen in a short time frame, all right? And so secular scientists have to have a long time frame. If you're going to explain how everything got here without God, you're going to need a long time. Now, I'm not saying evolution is true. Evolution doesn't make sense in any time frame, okay? But for them to get to the point of getting some people to believe that evolution is true, they'll say, well, anything can happen in a long time frame, which is, of course, not true. They'll say that time does things. I was talking to Jerry about that. They'll say that time creates things. Time can't do anything. Okay, they'll say the laws of physics created things. The laws of physics can't create anything. Okay, and so, that long age is critical to their having an explanation for how everything got here without God. And so, anytime you try to challenge that theory with them, they're going to be very quick to tell you that you've lost your mind. Okay, and they tell me that all the time. Okay, that I've lost my mind, that the earth can't be young. Okay, and so I'm going to show you some of the evidence today about that. Okay, but my point is they're going to desperately cling to the idea that the earth is old. Because if they can't, they don't have a believable explanation of how everything got here, all right? And so this is Frank Zindler, and he debated William Lane Craig, who you may have heard of, a famous Christian apologist. And here's what he said. The most devastating thing that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, and the central myth of Christianity is destroyed, if there never was an original sin, then there's no need for salvation. If there's no need for salvation, there's no need for a Savior. Okay? Now, I don't buy his conclusion here, but I think his reasoning is sound. If biological evolution were true and Adam and Eve never were real people, then we do have a problem. Okay. Now, biological evolution is not true. Okay. And so his conclusions are wrong, but his thinking, I think, is fairly clear. And so what do we do with that? I want to talk just a minute about why the age of the earth is so contentious for Christians, okay? Many Christians, of course, interpret the Bible as meaning that God created everything in 6 days about 6,000 years ago, all right? And so secular scientists are challenging that worldview on a regular basis, of course, and this conflict causes many in the Christian community to question their faith, okay? You may have been in that category. I know basically my speaking in churches, I would estimate that 10 to 20% of the people in the churches really struggle with this issue. They say, well, science says that the earth is old, but my Bible, reading it just straightforwardly, says that the earth is young, okay? And they say, well, I'm concerned. And should we be concerned if we find something that's in the Bible that's clearly untrue? Well, sure we should be concerned about that if it's apparently untrue, and I'll talk a minute in a little bit about how we should address that issue. But if a part of the Scripture is untrue, then can we trust the rest of it? And that's the concern that people have. They're saying, well, science has proved that the first part of the Bible is not true. They say. They haven't done that, but they say they have. And so some people are legitimately concerned in the Christian community because they say, well, can I trust the Scripture? Okay. And absolutely you can. Okay. And I'm going to show you why. Other reasons for why I believe that's true. Okay. And so what do we do? So let me go ahead and do that. How do we go ahead and try to resolve a conflict like this? First, what do? We go back to the Scriptures and we study it again more carefully and say, what do the Scriptures really say? Okay? We always ought to do that. No matter what issue we're looking at, we ought to go back to the Scriptures and say, what do the Scriptures really say? And we're going to look at that in great detail here in a little bit. Does the Bible really say that the earth is young? The question is. And then second, we should go back and look at the actual scientific data. Okay, we ought to look back at the actual scientific data, not what some secular scientist who has a totally different worldview than you do, not their conclusion of the data. We need to go back and look at the actual data and see if the actual data is consistent or inconsistent with what the Scripture says. That's the point in which we generally have a problem, okay? And so, and in most cases, the issue is going to be resolved. Either we weren't understanding the Scriptures well, or we weren't understanding the science well, okay? Because I'm convinced that at the end of time, when we understand everything, we're going to see that all these things are consistent with what the Scripture says. Unfortunately, today, as scientists, we don't understand everything, okay? And so at this time in history, it's not always going to be 100% apparent, okay? But most all the things are clear to me, even at this point, okay, about the Scriptures and science. All right, and so, but I want to talk to you for a minute about how not to resolve this issue and how a lot of people go about it now. But don't go just by taking the words of a secular scientist and say, "Well, I'm going to believe that." Okay, we don't want to do that, and remember that the secular scientists have convinced themselves that there is no God, all right? That's not what you believe, okay? You believe that there is a God, and so their worldview is different than your worldview, and so that taints how they look at the data. And you would look at the data differently. Now, of course, many of you are not scientists and you struggle with that, and there are resources out there that can help you along with this. But let me just give you one example. Here's a cartoon from Answers in Genesis. Says, the scientist over here on the left says, well, the Bible's not true. These rock layers show that the earth is millions of years old. You have to believe me, I'm a scientist. Okay. All right? Well, okay. And then the bad news is, though, that sometimes we look over here and we say, well, I'll just accept the millions of years and add it to the Bible. Okay? So is that the way we ought to do it? Should we accept what the secular scientists say and then just try to fit it into the Scriptures and change what we believe the Scriptures say? Well, I'm encouraging you not to take that approach. For instance, here is what happened at Mount St. Helens in 1980. Okay, the scientist says, well, those layers were laid down over millions of years. Well, no, they weren't. Okay, here are the layers that were laid down in a day or less than a day when Mount St. Helens erupted. Okay, and you can see the layers here going across this way, okay, and that way. And all those layers were laid down in a few hours. Okay, it's amazing, it's surprising that in a pyroclastic, it's a mud flow that comes from volcanic explosion, that they would be laid down in layers. You'd think that a traumatic event like that, it would just be all mixed up. Well, it's not. Even in a traumatic event like that, the layers are laid down, as you can see here. And so it doesn't take millions of years. So if you look at the actual data, not what the scientists say about the data, if you look at the actual data, you see, well, okay, it doesn't have to be a million years. You can actually lay down layers in a few hours. And so that's quite a difference, a few hours to a million years. Okay, and so you begin to see how your worldview affects that, and the scientists were just saying, well, it must be millions of years, but they didn't look at the scientific data. They didn't know that you can lay down layers in just a few hours. Okay, and so there, and so whoops, and so I just want you to be aware of where a lot of people have gone with this, and what they said, well, okay, I need to fit the millions of years in the Bible. Where am I going to put it? Okay, and some people have put it here. Well, actually, before Genesis 1:1, some people put it between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. Okay, and you've probably heard of that. That's the gap theory here. Some people put time between the days. Okay, so they'd say day one, and then there was a million years or a billion years, and then there was day two, and then there was day three, and day four, and that God created some things, okay, then waited for a long period of time and created more things, and then waited for a long period of time and created more things. Okay, but that's not what we get from a reading of Scripture. Okay, but you're going to see all those. Some of those are called progressive creationists here, or theistic evolutionists. Okay, a theistic evolution is somebody that believes in God, but believes that God used evolution to create everything. Okay, again, there's no evidence in the Scripture that that's what God did, and really no good evidence that evolution is true. Okay. All right, so there are a lot of ways to do that. You'll see that, but again, I'd encourage you not to do that. Here's good. This is a favorite cartoon of mine on this subject. It says, how can you believe the Bible? The Bible isn't reliable. Scientists have answers to show that the Bible isn't true. Okay, then you go to the next frame and you see, well, okay, these are estimates that scientists have made over the years of how old the earth is. And they started at 75,000 years, which was way off the Scriptures even back then, and people knew it. 75,000 years was really old, they thought. And now we're up to 4.5 billion years. Okay, so the scientists, you can believe the scientists, they started out at 75,000, and now they're up to 4.5 billion. Okay, and so what do you accept? And what's even funnier is this one, I think. This is Brent Dalrymple, who studied a lot of the age of the earth stuff. And he says, now, estimates of the age of the earth made prior to 1950, biblical or otherwise, are all wrong because they're based on methods now known to be invalid. Okay, and so, well, can we trust the stuff that they're doing now? Well, no more than we could trust it then, and I'll talk to you more about why that is later. But I just want you to know that scientists now believe that the earth is 4.54 billion years old to an accuracy of way better than 1%. Okay, and so I just want Just wanted to make sure you understood that. Okay, so it's crazy. So how old is the earth? Okay, so how old is the earth? Were any of you here when the earth was created? Okay. I know some of us, I feel kind of old today, but I don't think I'm that old. Okay, and so there's only one that knows how old the earth is exactly, and that's God. Okay, He's the only one. He's the only one that was there when the earth was created, and I think I can confidently say that He remembers when He created it. Okay, and so only God knows for sure when the earth was created. All right, and so what I want to do for you now is to give you a biblical, what I believe is a biblical case for a young earth. Okay, now let me just say that many of you here may not believe that the earth is young, and that's okay. Okay, but I want to try to show you why I believe the earth is young. All right, and so I'll give you what I call a biblical case for why I believe the earth is young, and then we'll talk about the science too. Okay, and so we'll talk about the meaning of the Hebrew word yom, which is for day, in the context of Genesis 1. We're going to talk about the genealogies in the Bible. Okay, we're going to talk about the fourth commandment. Going to talk about what Jesus believed about the creation account. And we're going to talk about death being a consequence of sin. All right? And so all those things, I think, help point us to a young earth, at least not 4.5 billion years old. All right? I like to go back and talk about Genesis, but I even like more talking about the other places in the Scriptures where it talks, I believe, talks about a young earth. But let's look back, first of all, at Genesis chapter 1. And when you're looking at words like the Hebrew word yom, what do you do to try to figure out what it means? You look at it in context of the other words around it. That's the way we figure out how all words mean, right? As we look at the context, because day, even in English, can mean different things. Okay, it can mean the light part of a day. It can mean the whole day. It can be like in my father's day. Okay, meaning a long time ago. Okay, so there are a lot of potential meanings of day. But what do we see here? And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day, or day one. Okay, and so what is the context here? We're talking about what? We have day and night and a number. Okay, we have night and day and number, night and day and number, night and day and number, and it goes on and on and on. Okay, so what I believe that God is trying to tell us, yeah, I really mean a day. Okay, I'm talking about evening and morning, day one, evening and morning, the second day, evening and morning, the third day. And so it seems clear to me that He's trying to tell us that it was a day. And some people say, well, okay, Alan, there wasn't a sun until day 4. Okay, so how in the world could there have been day and night before then? Well, was there any light before day 4? Yes, there was. And what was the light before day 4? It was God Himself. Okay, God Himself was the light before day 4. So was the earth rotating on day 1? I believe it was. Okay, I believe God created it rotating already. Okay, and so what could there theoretically have been day and night on days 1, 2, and 3? Sure. Was there anybody there to see it? Only God. So there are no people there to see it. And so to me, there's a possibility of day and night from a perspective of God being in the source of light. Okay, but it's more clear to us on day 4, 5, and 6. Okay, all right. So what about the genealogies? If you look at the genealogies, as you see in the Scriptures, what do you see? You see creation, you see corruption, the sin, and then you see the different genealogies here on their way to Christ. And if you add up all the numbers of the people in that, you get about 4,000 years from creation to Christ. Okay, about 4,000 years. Now, some people argue and they say, well, Alan, there's a couple of places in that genealogies where it's a little confusing. They may have said son and they really may have meant grandson. Okay? Well, okay, I'm not sure that's true really, but even if it were, let's say there are two places in the genealogies, and it's not really son, it's really grandson. So what does that add to the 4,000 years? A couple of generations, okay? And so how long is it now? Excuse me, instead of, sorry guys, I'm losing my, hang on, let's see. Okay. So what is it now? So if it's not 4,000 years, it's 4,000 years plus 2 generations. So it's 4,040 years, okay? And so can you get to 4.5 billion years by adding a few generations to the genealogies? Well, I don't think so, okay? And so to me, just a straightforward look at it. And was the nation Israel, did they keep good records? Did they know who the people in the nation Israel were? Well, they did. They kept excellent records about that. And so they were very concerned about who was in the nation Israel and who was not. Okay? And so they kept good records about these genealogies. And so was it now, does the Bible say what the date of creation is? Okay? Does the Bible say what the date of creation is? It doesn't. Okay? It doesn't give us an exact date. Now, there are books out there that try to predict the day. There's a book out there by a man who studied this for forever, Archbishop Usher, and he decided that the day of creation was October 23rd, 4004 BC at 9 a.m. in the morning. All right. Now, is he right? I don't know. I'm guessing that there's a good chance that he's not exactly right, but I think he may be in the ballpark. And so if he were, how old is the earth? Well, it's around 6,000 years. Okay. And so you've got roughly 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham, 2,000 from Abraham to Christ, and about 2,000 from Christ to today. And so roughly 6,000 years. Would the scientists tell me that I'm crazy to believe that the earth is roughly 6,000 years old? Of course. They think I'm crazy, that the earth looks old. And we'll talk about how old the earth looks here in a little bit. Okay, and so what do we got here? Whoops. That's supposed to say the fourth commandment at the top. Sorry about that. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. It says, for in 6 days, what? The Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. All right, and so in Exodus now, we're in Exodus, not in Genesis now. What does it say? In 6 days, the Lord made everything. Okay, the seas, the earth, everything that's in them. And of course, that's what feeding back to the day in Genesis 1. Okay, and so in Exodus we see a similar thing. But to me, it's more powerful evidence. If we look, what did Jesus say? What did Jesus believe about this? He said in Matthew 19:4, he said, now let me give you background. He's talking to the Pharisees. Okay, Pharisees have asked him about marriage and divorce, and here he goes talking to the Pharisees. He says, and he answered and said to them, have you not read? Okay, that's my favorite part. All the time when he's addressing the Pharisees, what does he say? He says, have you not read? And why does that make them mad as they can't hardly see straight? Because that's all they say they do is read the scriptures. Okay. And Jesus is saying to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? Okay. Again, a good word for us today. Okay. In our culture today, he made them male and female. Okay. And so Jesus seems to believe that God created people in the beginning. And he said, and for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And so he addresses marriage right after that. But that's also established in Genesis. Okay? And one of the more important ones, too, to remember is that death is a consequence of sin. Let me just read several verses here that I want to talk about to help you see that. Genesis 2:16 and 17 said, and the Lord God commanded man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, For in the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. Okay? Let me go on. Let me read a few more verses, and then we'll talk about it some minute. Genesis 3:17. And to Adam he said, this is God speaking, of course. To Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat of the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Okay? And so what happened when Adam and Eve sinned? Okay. What happened? Instantly they died spiritually, right? Instantly they died spiritually, and ultimately they died physically, dust to dust. Okay. So spiritually, instantaneously they died. What a bad day that was for all of us. All right. Of course, we would have done the same thing had we been there. All right. But instantly they died spiritually and ultimately physically. Thorns and thistles are interesting. I may get back to that here in a minute if I have time. But I just want you to remember that, and I'm sorry about this, is black. This would have gone on forever, is what this said. God created the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, to go on forever. Okay, if they had not sinned, what would have happened? Okay, well, we don't know for sure, but what do we know here? Eden was a very good place to live, right? God made them essentially a perfect place to live. Adam and Eve were perfectly suited for each other. God made them that way. The tree of life would have sustained them had they not sinned, and there was only one prohibition that God had given them, okay? Do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, okay? But sadly, that was one too many rule, okay? He had one prohibition. That was one too many, apparently, because they couldn't follow it and didn't, okay? And so, if they had not sinned, presumably the Garden of Eden would have gone on forever, okay? So death is a consequence of sin. Therefore, just as one man, Romans 5:12, therefore, just as one man, this is through one man, sin entered the world, and death through sin. So death spread to all men because all sinned. Okay, and so death is a consequence of sin. If you had evolution, would you see death before people came about? Okay, if you had evolution, would there have been death before Adam and Eve came about? Well, certainly there would have been. Okay, and so death wouldn't have been a consequence of sin. Death would have predated Adam and Eve. Okay, the thorns and thistles we see in the fossil record. Okay, they're a result of sin, but we see those in the fossil record, and so those would have predated Adam and Eve also, and so that's one of the things you need to remember if you're talking about just that order, that's the way it was. Just another couple of things. Death is separation from a holy God, of course. A holy and just God must punish disobedience and remain separated from sin. The relationship between God and man was what? It was broken. It was broken at that point. And I talked about that. Spiritual death was imminent. Physical death returned. One other consequence of Adam and Eve's sin was not only for them, but also for basically the whole universe. Romans 8:20-22, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself would be also set free from slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. Okay, and so it's almost a necessary consequence that the whole creation, not only Adam and Eve themselves, were affected by their sin. So remember the history of the world. We started out, God created a perfect world, a very good world, okay, right here in Adam and Eve. What happened? Sin, death, disease, pain, suffering, emotional anguish, all that is in the world that we are in today, okay. We don't know anything about this world up here. We've never been in that kind of world, okay, but we're in this world today. But what do we look forward to? That world. Okay, what's God going to do when he comes back again? He's going to make a new heavens and a new earth where righteousness dwells, not sin, but where righteousness dwells. Okay, and so we have this to look forward to as followers of Christ. But we live in this right now. And so it's important as we look at the history of the world and we look at the scientific data, it's important that we remember what the Bible says about the history of the world, okay? And how what we see fits this, okay? Do we see a broken world today? What was Larry talking about? Israel, Hamas. Do we see a broken world today? Absolutely. We do, every day in the headlines. Do we have something better to look forward to? Absolutely. When they sinned, death was a consequence, and there's the consequence, okay? And so that doesn't really fit with the fossil record. I'm going to skip this because we've already talked about that. So let's look now at the scientific evidence. Well, actually, let me back up. Let me make one point here, okay? This is the history from a secular viewpoint, okay? Started with death in the evolutionary view. Somehow Adam arose. This doesn't fit with God's description of very good very well, this early part of history. So that doesn't fit well with the Bible. We see Adam, and then we see death continuing into the present, because they'd say evolution is continuing and we're continuing to evolve, they would say. But the history of the world says very good in the beginning. Until sin, then there was death, but then our future as followers of Christ, again, is very good. So a very different history, death all the way, or good, death, and then good in the end. Okay, and so the history of the world from a Christian viewpoint is very different than the history of the world from a secular viewpoint. Okay, whoops, there we go. Okay, so let's look at the scientific evidence for just a minute. But I need to help you understand a little bit about science first. Okay, so what is science? A study of the natural world based on the facts learned through experiment and observation. Now, some newer definitions of science that you may find are not that straightforward. Okay, this is the one I like to stick with, though. They try to adjust the definition of science so it fits a more secular view now, but this is really what science is. Through experiments and observation. This is the Webster definition so far, but it will change. And remind you what I said last time, without an orderly universe, there's no reason to study science anyway. If the universe isn't orderly, doesn't follow some rules, then why it would change day to day, so there'd be no reason to study it. Okay, and so does God intervene in history? Okay, does God intervene in history? He absolutely does. Does the secular folks want to believe that? Absolutely not. Okay, they want to believe that everything's always been as it was. Okay, but that's not the history. God intervened in history. Knowing this, first of all, that in the last days mockers will come with their mocking, following after their own lusts, and saying, "Where is this promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues as it was from the beginning of creation." Is that what the mockers are saying today? Okay, yeah, everything's the same. It's just, it's just millions of years and time created everything. But what does the Bible say? For when they maintain this, it escapes their notice that by the word of God, the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and by water, through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded by water. Did God intervene in history at the flood? Absolutely. Everything that had the breath of life died, except for Noah and his family and the animals on the ark. Okay, and so does God intervene in history? He absolutely does. But the secular scientists don't want to believe that. Well, so let's talk about the scientific method for a minute. What I used at Eastman every day when I was trying to do science, okay, I would make an observation. I would make a hypothesis about what might be true. I would do an experiment to test that hypothesis, okay, and then I would look and say, well, does my experiment fit with my hypothesis? Does the world act like I think it does? Okay, and if it did, or if it didn't, well, my hypothesis must have been wrong. So I go back and change my hypothesis and do more experiments to see if those experiments would be consistent with my hypothesis. If the data do agree with my hypothesis, I do more experiments, because one experiment, I haven't proven anything, okay? And let's think about this for a minute. We can go through this forever. Have we proven anything by going through this scientific method? Okay? We've just disproven things. Okay? We haven't really proven things. We can become more confident as we do more experiments and as our experiments continue to support our thesis. But even if I've done 1,000 experiments, even if I've done 1,000,000 experiments, I still haven't proven that hypothesis is true. So when a scientist tells you that they've proven something, when a chemist or physicist tells you they've proven something, that's not right, okay? They've disproven a lot of things, and they have a bunch of evidence that what they believe is true, but they haven't proven it, okay? And so that's really not a word that a scientist in doing science like chemistry and physics should use, okay? So science has its limitations. Scientific studies, we can learn a lot through experimentation and observation, but can science tell us about the future or the distant past? Okay? Can I predict, as a scientist, can I predict the future? Ugh, no, not very well. I can guess, but can I predict the future? No, I can't. Science can help us understand how things work, okay, but science can't answer the moral questions, okay? We can look at how a baby develops in a mother's womb. We understand that fairly well now, but can we say what we ought to do with that baby in the mother's womb as scientists? Not really. I can just tell you how things work, but I can't. Science is not. That's not really a part of science, is to answer moral kind of questions. Okay. Does science apply to the distant past? Again, now we're going to talk about radiometric dating here soon. Investigating the distant past is like forensic science, like what policemen do when they're trying to investigate a crime. Okay. But it's like they're trying to investigate a crime that happened many years ago. So when policemen try to investigate a crime that happened yesterday, their chances of finding good evidence is pretty good. If they're investigating a crime that happened 100 years ago, what are the chances of them finding good evidence? Oh, nobody that saw it is still alive. So can they find evidence? Maybe. Maybe they can find evidence in historical records, but when you're trying to investigate something in the distant past, that's really a problem, right, for us. And so we can be less confident about things that happen in the distant past. Okay. Age. The amount of time during which a thing has existed. That's the definition of age, all right? Age is a matter of history, not of a scientific measurement, okay? Can I take your blood and determine how old you are? Okay? No, the doctors could make a guess. Could they take a piece of your bone and estimate how old you are. They can make an estimate of how old you are, but they can't determine how old you are based on a scientific test, right? Matter of fact, let's do a little test here, okay? How old are these people? Okay, how old? These are my children. Okay, this is taken quite a ways. I'll give you a hint. This was taken quite a ways back. Okay, these are my children. How old were they when this picture was taken? Do you think, roughly? Mid-20s. Good guess. That's about what they were. They were in their mid-20s. Okay, at that point. What about this? What about this guy? This is my dad. Okay, several years ago. Okay. Oh gosh, he'd love you for that. Okay. What's that? 45. He'd love you even more. Okay. He was in his mid-80s at this point. Okay, in his mid-80s, and y'all made I know you were underestimating, but he was in his mid-80s. He made it to 98 before he passed away. He made it to 98, and so, but he was in his mid-80s. What about this guy? Okay, how old is he? This 6 months. He was probably. What about the mustache? I mean, you're not fooled by the mustache. Okay, well, okay. So that's really a pacifier. Okay, so yeah, he's maybe 9 months old or something at that point. Yeah, he's around 10 now. But yeah, that was Graham, first grandchild. But yeah, but why do you guys know roughly how old these people are? Why is it that you know that? Observation. But you've observed people of different ages every day. And you know roughly what people of different ages look like, right? Okay, so it makes sense that we could guess the age of people, right? Now, of course, surgery and some of the other things. Okay, we need to fix this a little bit. Thank you. Okay, hang on just a second. How's that? Is that better? Okay, good. And so you can guess the age of these people because you've seen people of the similar age. Okay, so how about and we have written evidence of things that are older, but dates that are older we have a hard time with. But let's look at these planets. Okay, so how old are these planets? What do you think? How old are those planets up there? 6,000 years old. Okay, that's a good guess based on a biblical view. But do you know what the age of the planets are by how they look? We have no idea. The scientists say they look old. How old does a planet look? I mean, how old does the universe look? I mean, we have no reference point. Right? My point is we have no reference point to guess. I mean, except the scriptures, okay, the scripture said about 6,000 years old, okay. But from a secular viewpoint, how old are those planets? We can't tell by looking, okay, and so that's my point. And here we go, the Brent Dalrymple that I showed you on an earlier slide says that after more than 2 centuries of scientific endeavor, we've concluded that the age of the planet on which we live is 4.54 billion years old, the value which is based on the relationship between lead isotopes in meteorites and in the Earth has an uncertainty of less than 1%. Okay, so based on this, we're essentially completely certain that the Earth is 4.54 billion years old. Okay, now what's it based on? It's based on radiometric dating. Okay, based on radiometric dating. Well, is radiometric dating accurate? Is it this accurate? Well, and it's based on what were the samples they used? Well, they used meteorites and some rocks that they found on the Earth. What have meteorites got to do with the age of the Earth? Okay, it's an assumption on their part that the meteorites were made at a similar time that the Earth was. Is that true? I don't know. But they think it's true because of their theory about how planets were formed. Okay? And their theory would say that this space junk, came together and made the planets, and that the meteorites are just part of more space junk that didn't make a planet, and so they must be the same age as the planets. Okay, and so is that assumption true? That's the kind of thing we're going to talk about, is what do we know about the past? What do we know for sure about the past? And that's the question. Okay, and so what is radiometric dating? It's where you take an unstable element and you look at how it decays. Okay, an unstable element or isotope, and I'll try to explain what that means. It's a way of estimating the age of something based on its decay of these radioactive elements. All right, and so here's an example of an isotope that is unstable, radioactive. That's carbon-14. Now, we're made of carbon. You've got a lot of carbon in you, okay? Almost all of it, or a lot of it, is this one right here, carbon-12. It's got 6 neutrons and 6 protons, okay? And 6 electrons, okay, whatever. So, 6 electrons. But there's about 1% is actually carbon-13, okay? That one's not radioactive, it's not unstable, but it's got an extra neutron in it. And then about 1 in a trillion of your carbon molecules is actually carbon-14. And it is radioactive. And so you are radioactive, okay? Now, not very radioactive, but you are just a little bit. How does that make you feel? But you don't need to worry about it. It's just a little bit. You're just a little bit radioactive, okay? So you have a few carbon-14 molecules in you. And how do they decay? Well, the carbon-14 decays to nitrogen over, 5,730 years. Okay, so the half-life, and I'll explain what the half-life is in a minute. So the carbon-14 in you and in everything decays half of it every let's say every 6,000 years on the average, okay? And it makes an electron and an anti-neutrino. We won't talk about that, but they're byproducts of that, okay? And so what happens? So let's presume that these red molecules up here are carbon-14 molecules. Let's say that they're molecules in your body, okay? So after 5,730 years, half of those carbon-14s turn into nitrogens. So the red ones now, which are carbon-14, are now green. I made the green ones nitrogen, okay? And so half that carbon-14 decays every 5,730 years, and half again. So we're down to here at 2 half-lives. At 3 half-lives, we're down to here. At 4 half-lives, we're down to here. And at 5 half-lives, carbon-14 is nearly gone, okay? So at about 30,000 years, it's nearly gone. Matter of fact, at about 50,000 years, it's really close to being gone. And in 100,000 years, it's completely gone, okay? Even in the earth at that point, you wouldn't find any carbon-14. And so, can carbon-14 confirm that the earth is billions of years old? No. The carbon-14 half-life is not long enough. So when somebody tells you, based on carbon-14, the Bible's wrong, you need to tell them that they need to go back and check the science, okay? Carbon-14 they do. Now, there are elements that have longer half-lives, like uranium. And those elements, you can estimate a longer age of the earth, but not with carbon, okay? And so how does that happen? The carbon-14 is made by the high-energy rays that are from the sun that fortunately most don't get to us, okay? And so the carbon-14 is in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, okay? What happens, what soaks up carbon dioxide? The plants do, okay? And so that small amount of carbon-14 and the carbon and the CO2 goes into the plants absorb it, it becomes a part of the plant, and then what happens? Well, here it is as a part of the plant, and what happens? Well, animals eat the plants. We eat the plants, okay? And so that carbon-14 that had gotten into plants is now in animals and now in us, as particularly when we eat animals too, and the meat too. And so that's why I say you are radioactive, fortunately to a small extent, but you now have carbon-14 in you. And what happens to the cow or to you, at death, the intake of carbon-14 stops. Okay, so at that point, you've got all the carbon-14 in you, or in the plant, or in the animal, whatever. When death occurs, okay, and no more uptake of carbon-14 occurs, then you have that much carbon-14. And so what happens after that? Okay, that amount of carbon-14, it starts to decay. And so after about 6,000 years, let's say this cow here, okay, after 6,000 years, wherever those carbon molecules are, half of them are now not C14 anymore, they're nitrogen, okay? And then after another 6,000 years, half of that is gone. Now another 6,000 years, half of that is gone. And by five or eight half-lives, all the carbon-14 is gone, okay? And so there isn't any left. And so that's how people use carbon-14 to date things, okay? Now what's that based on? It's based on it's based on a decay rate that we measure today. Okay, it's measured today. Has that decay rate changed over, we've only measured it for 100 years. Okay, so was that decay rate the same 6,000 years ago? We don't know. It might have been, it might not have been. It might have been changed because of creation. It might have been changed because of the flood. We don't know. We don't know what happened over those 6,000 years. And so that's the problem with trying to estimate the age of the earth based on anything. Scientists used to say, well, I'm going to base the age of the earth on how fast the earth cooled, because I know that the earth was hot in the beginning, and now I know that the earth is not hot now, and so I'm going to estimate how hot it was in the beginning. How in the world hot was it? We have no idea. But they estimated how hot it was, and they said, well, how long, they do their calculations, say, well, how long would it have taken for it to cool to the temperature we have today? And that's how they made the 75,000 year estimate of the age of the earth. They said, well, it probably took about 75,000 years for the earth to cool from being molten to this. Now they say, well, it must have been 4.5 billion years, okay? But so your assumptions about the past are critical to getting an age of something, right? And so if your assumptions of the past are right, then your estimate of the age is pretty good. If your assumptions about the past are wrong, then your estimates about how old that thing is are wrong, okay? And so that's why I think that these are wrong, and we'll talk a minute about some of the reasons that they might be, okay? So that just goes through that. Let's see here. Okay. So many radioactive elements like uranium and rubidium have half-lives in billions of years, and scientists are highly confident that these give a reliable number. And here's the decay profile. This is going to be on the test right here. This one is. Okay. You don't need to know this, but this is, you start with uranium, and it decays this way through thorium and protactin, and all the way down through here, and down to here, and then up to here, and then down to here. There's a lot of different ways. It finally gets to mercury. Okay, and so uranium, 238, I believe, 238, decays through this pathway through radon, polonium, lead, bismuth, polonium, and back through a lot of things, and finally gets to mercury. Okay, and so this is well known, and the scientists have measured the decay rates for these elements over the past 100 years. Okay, that's all the time frame we know. Extrapolation in science is dangerous when you extrapolate into an area that you don't know anything about. And so where are they extrapolating? Well, we're extrapolating from 100 years to 4 billion years. Okay, is that a long extrapolation? That's a huge extrapolation. Okay, would you take that kind of extrapolation on something today? No way. No, scientists at Eastman, if you were to propose that to your supervision at Eastman, well, I've measured it today, but I believe in 1,000 years it's going to be this. Who cares? I mean, nobody would believe that, okay? But that's what we're looking at here, is that kind of an estimate of that long ago. And so this is a way to think about it if you want to. You could think about this parent element, like uranium, going to one of these daughter elements, which is one of the decayed elements. The thing is that, did this decay rate stay the same the whole time, or did it change? Did somebody add something to your sample, or was something lost from your sample in the meantime? All these things are assumptions that you have to make when you're making an estimate. The only thing we know is what we can measure today. Okay, the other four things that you need to know to tell how old something is are assumptions we made about the past. Okay, are those assumptions right? Nobody knows. If the assumptions are right, I think the science and the calculations make sense. Okay, so that sample would be old. I'm worried about the assumptions. I'm not convinced that they're true. As I think I teased you with last time, carbon-14 is actually now supportive of a young Earth. Okay, it used to be people would say, well, this proves the Bible's wrong, it proves the Earth is old. But the funny thing is that, as I was telling you, carbon-14 should be gone after 50,000 years. It certainly will be gone under any estimate at 100,000 years, okay, any way you measure it. But pretty much gone at 50,000 years. Okay, so what does that mean? If you find carbon-14 in a sample, that means that sample is less than 50,000 years old, okay? Means the sample is less than 50,000 years old. Well, those scientists didn't measure anything they knew was old, okay? They didn't measure anything because they knew it was old. There wasn't any reason to measure it. Well, it turns out that some creation scientists decided, well, maybe we'll measure some of these things and see if they really are old. Okay, like, let's see, what did they look at first? They looked at coal. Okay, now coal, what in your kids' textbooks, what does it say about coal? Well, coal is millions of years old, right? That's what they say. Now, never mind that they find stuff in coal that's modern, okay, like hard hats and spark plugs and things like that. Okay, but never mind that. The coal is old. Okay, and so, and what about diamonds? They say diamonds are billions of years old. That heat and pressure, it takes so long to make diamonds. They must be billions of years old. Well, it turns out when you measure carbon-14 in diamonds, it's actually in there. Okay, there's carbon-14 in diamonds. Okay, now, and the scientists will say, well, those diamonds were contaminated. Okay, let's think about that for a minute. Okay, what's the hardest substance we know? Diamonds. Okay, the hardest substance we know. And, well, those diamonds must be contaminated. Contaminated with what? And how did you get it in there? It doesn't make any sense, but they continue to cling to that. Well, it must be contaminated because it's got carbon-14 in it. Coal has got carbon-14 in it. Natural gas has got carbon-14 in it. All those fossil fuels that we talk about that must be millions of years old have got carbon-14 in them. Guess what? They were buried in the flood. Okay, and the heat and pressure after the flood generated the coal and the oil and the natural gas. I assume the diamonds were formed in a similar way. Okay, we don't know, but I'm certain about the flood and the organic materials. And so, is the Earth young or old? Well, carbon-14, if you look at it now, says, well, maybe the Earth is young. The scientists don't want to buy that. Okay, they don't want to believe that for reasons that I talked about earlier, right? They need an old Earth, and so they don't want to look at. So what do they do with these data? I'm going to talk about three things real quick. Yep, got time. 3 bits of evidence. I think I teased you last time that the dinosaur bones actually help us understand the Earth is young. I'm going to talk about that. Talk about some 160 million year old ink from a squid. Okay, supposedly 160 million years old, and some ancient bacteria, even older than that. Okay, so first I want to talk about fossils. I think Steve talked about this, so I'll run through this real quickly. But, okay, so how do you make a fossil? Well, this pretty little fish is swimming along, and unfortunately he gets buried in mud. Okay, so that's how you make a fossil. You bury some plant or animal in mud really quickly, and then it decays, the organic material goes away, and it's replaced by minerals, or inorganic salts. And so ultimately you end up with the hard parts that are left. Okay, the soft parts are gone generally. So they decay more slowly in mud, but they still decay. And we'll talk about that though in a minute. But generally you're left with the bones and the teeth. So in fossils, what do you see? You generally see the bones and the teeth. Although there are fossils of things like jellyfish around now, okay, which is surprising. And so, but what I just tell you is something that you already know, is that soft organic tissues are easily broken down by oxygen and water, okay? Water breaks down proteins, oxygen breaks down DNA, it breaks down proteins also. So over longer periods of time, over many years, soft organic things that are dead decay, right? We all know that. Dead things decay, okay? Under normal circumstances, degradation takes only a few years. Under conditions where there's little bacteria and little oxygen, the degradation is slower. Maybe it takes a few thousand years, but not millions of years, okay? But no soft tissue under any conditions on the earth should last more than a few thousand years, okay? That's just the organic chemistry of it. I've studied degradation, and that's absolutely true, okay? So Mary Schweitzer, they found a dinosaur bone out west. It's the femur bone of a T-Rex, okay? So it's 6 feet long, about this big around. It weighed a ton, okay? They were trying to get this bone up. They were picking it up by a helicopter. The helicopter couldn't pick the bone up. And so they did something that they hate to do. They cut the bone in half, okay? And they decided, well, we'll take some fractions of these bones and send them to the laboratory and see what we can find. We know we won't find anything because they're old, okay? And so, but they put this big plaster cast around it, but they ended up having to cut it in half. And so they sent the bone fragments to Mary Schweitzer over at North Carolina State University, and she started measuring them. She said, well, maybe I'll just run some tests that I normally run on bones. And what she did was dissolve away the hard parts of a bone. Okay, now, okay, anybody ever broken a bone in here? Okay, all right, did it hurt? Okay, it hurt a lot, didn't it? And well, that's because there are nerves in your bones, okay? And they get broken and they hurt. There are blood vessels in your bones. So there's soft tissue in your bones. And so if you put your bone, if you take a chicken bone you get from the grocery store, you put it in acetic acid, in vinegar, a little stronger than vinegar, you dissolve away the hard parts and you're left with the soft parts. They're still there. That's what Mary Schweitzer did with these dinosaur bones. Now these dinosaur bones are supposed to be at least 68 million years old. Okay, at least 68 million years old. So they shouldn't have any soft material in them at all, no chance, okay? But here's what Mary Schweitzer found.
Branching blood vessels that contain small round red microstructures floating in the vessels. I said, this is not possible. Do it again. We got another piece of bone, we put it in the solution, we waited 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, looked again, more blood vessels. We must have repeated that with probably 17 or 18 different fragments of bone.
That's some of the tissue that Mary Schweitzer found in the bone, okay? Did you hear what she said? How many times did she do this experiment? 17 times. Why did she do that? When you're finding something you expect, do you do an experiment 17 times? No, but when you find something you don't expect, what do? You do it 17 times because you don't believe it, and you keep on doing it, and you keep on doing it, and she did it 17 times, and she was finally convinced that what she was finding was real. And she finally published it. She probably wishes she hadn't, but because of the flack she got from the data. But now, after she published that, a lot of other people had courage, and they published similar things, okay? And so this is not uncommon. She found that, and did you hear what she said? She found little red round microstructures. Did you see that? Here's a picture of those little red round microstructures that she found in the blood vessel, okay? Now, I don't know how long it's been since you've had biology, but I want you to look at what that is right there. Okay. What is that? It looks like a donut with a hole filled in. Okay. It's red, unretouched. It was red when they took the pictures. Okay. What does it look like? It looks like a red blood cell. Okay. It looks like an actual red blood cell. That actual red blood cell, according to them, is 68 million years old. Okay. Now, what do they do when you give blood? What do they do with it? Okay. They refrigerate it right away because they're afraid the blood will break down, right? Now, I'm not saying these red blood cells are still functional, but they're there, okay? And they look exactly like a modern red blood cell looks like, okay? That red blood cell is not 68 million years old. I'll be surprised if it's even, I'm surprised that even after the flood, that this could have been still look like this after a few thousand years. I mean, flood maybe 4,500 years old, 4,500 years old. I'm surprised it would still even look like that. These may have happened in a later flood. I don't know, but certainly that's not 68 million years old. This is not the only picture. There are other pictures of other red blood cells from other dinosaurs. They found actually bone cells, actual bone cells that look just like yours, okay? This is what they call an osteocyte here. That's in a modern bone cell from a mouse. Today, here's one that they found in that hadrosaur dinosaur right there. These things have been broken here. These Philopodia are very fragile, and they've been broken, but what does that cell look like? You can see the fragments that are there. So that looks like a modern bone cell. After 68 million years, they say? No, not a chance. And here's one that was in solution that actually came free. Okay, this one was kind of tied up in the bone still. Here's one that came free, and you can see even more of the Philopodia, what they call them, connections there. And there's another picture of it, one even more complete. And this hadrosaur, of course, it's a dinosaur. According to them, at least 68 million years old. Some more unlikely structures. Okay, probably the most unstable molecule in your body is RNA. Okay, the second most unstable molecule in your body is DNA. Okay, and I mean really unstable. A few hours in the laboratory, often they have to be very careful, even for a few hours in the laboratory. But under conditions like this, DNA could last somewhat longer. But guess what they found fragments of in these dinosaur bones? They found fragments of DNA. Okay, still fragments that are still somewhat intact, short fragments of DNA. To me, that is incredible that you could even find fragments of DNA in dinosaur bones, but they did. And they've tested and they've tested and they've tested in their DNA. Okay, their DNA that's similar to reptile DNA today. Okay, and so they can't really deny what it is. It's dinosaur DNA. Okay, and so here's some more of the bone cells done by somebody else, a friend of mine. He even found some organelles in a cell. Okay, some of the organelles that are still present, and so the dinosaurs really today are not. They're used as ways to sell long ages to children. Am I right? You've probably got lots of books in your house that talk about dinosaurs, and part of those books, they talk about the age of dinosaurs and how they were here in the beginning and how we didn't live with dinosaurs and all those things, which I believe are not true. And so, but that's the common theory. And for evolution to be true, that needs to be true. Okay. Real quick, let's see. I've got... this is a ink sac from a squid that they say is 160 million years old, not 68 million years old, but at least 160 million years old. And here's the ink sac right here. Okay, looks a lot like an ink sac from a squid today. Okay, this researcher took the ink. put a little bit of water and a little bit of ammonia, mixed it with that black stuff that was in that fossil, and used it as an ink to draw this picture. Okay? What was she drawing? She was drawing what that squid looked like when it was alive. Okay? And so she took the ink from that from that supposed to be 100, I don't know about you, but what do you think your big pens at home are going to be after 160 million years? Okay. Are you going to be able to use them to write with? I'm guessing no. Okay. And so they've actually found ink that they were easily able to reconstitute into ink by putting a little water and a little ammonia in it and made an ink, and were able to draw that picture. To me, and they're fascinated that they could do that after 160 million years. Okay, this is one of my favorites. So this one here, okay, they found salt crystals in the earth, and matter of fact, there are places in the earth where there are deposits of salt that are a mile thick. Okay, deposits of sodium chloride that are a mile thick, and well, they've looked at these salt crystals, and they think these salt crystals are about 250 million years old. Okay, now, so we've gone from 68 million to 160 million. Now we're at 250 million years old. And so they've looked in some of these little voids in the crystal here and found there's a little bit of liquid left in there. And they've found, they've found these things in there, okay? Those look kind of like bacteria, okay? And they said, well, what are we going to do? Well, let's just see if we can grow them, okay? Let's just see if, when they're only 250 million years old, they ought to still be easily grown, right? Well, of course not, okay? I mean, how long would the DNA in these things have lasted? Okay, I mean, in order for these things to be able to be reconstituted, their DNA has to be almost completely intact, okay, for them to live. Okay, there can't be much degradation. And so what did they do? They reconstituted them, put them in a solution that you can grow bacteria, and they grew. Okay, they were alive. Okay, these bacteria supposedly after 250 million years are still able to be alive. Okay, they say. Okay, and so to the credit of some other scientists in this, they questioned this theory and they said, well, would the bacteria not degrade over? Would the DNA not degrade over 250 million years? And I didn't tell you, those bacteria that they found in there were almost identical to bacteria that live today. Okay, their DNA, there were only about 4 or 5 of the segments of DNA that were different in those bacteria compared to DNA that live today. Okay, and so the scientists are saying, well, after 250 million years, surely the DNA would be more different than that. Well, by evolution, okay, and by degradation, of course it would be. Okay, but that tells you that they're not 250 million years old. And so, let me just kind of try to wind this up a little bit today. This issue for Christians is often a stumbling block, okay? And it's a stumbling block, why? Because the scientists are saying that the earth is billions of years old. Is the evidence consistent with that? I say no, okay? And so I've looked at the Bible. I'm convinced that the Bible is telling us that the earth is young. It doesn't give us a creation date, no, but the genealogies and the other evidence is pretty clear to me that the earth is young. So after re-looking at the Bible, I'm convinced that the Bible is saying the earth is young. After looking at the scientific data, I'm pretty well convinced that they haven't proven that the earth is old. Okay, and that the latest scientific evidence is more consistent with a young earth. Okay, but I just want you to remember that, like back say 400 or 500 years ago, before the invention of the telescope. All right? Let's go back 400 or 500 years. All right? Back then in Europe, the people were arguing whether they could count all the stars or not. Okay? And most people were arguing that they could. They could count all the stars and that it was about 1,000. Okay? They could see about 1,000 stars, and they were arguing whether it was 995 or whether it was 1,005. Okay, but they were sure that they could see all the stars, and they were sure the Bible was wrong. Because the Bible implies what? That the number of stars are uncountable, like the number of grains of sand on the sea. Okay, what do we know now? We know now there's a lot more than 1,000 stars. There's a 2 with about 23 or 24 zeros after it, number of stars. An uncountable number of stars. Okay, and so, matter of fact, my friend John Evans, some of you may know him, he's crazy enough to do the calculation, and he estimated how many grains of sand there are on the earth, and he looked at how many stars we think there are today, and he said, yeah, within an order of magnitude, they're the same. Okay, now I don't know whether that's going to continue to be true or not, whether we're going to find more stars, whether we're going to find more sand, but it's an uncountable number of stars. So 500 years ago, people were convinced the Bible was wrong because they thought there were 1,000 stars. They're not 1,000 stars, okay? And so even today, we don't understand everything. And so we may find things today find a thing or two today that are apparently inconsistent with what the Bible says, but almost all the things that I see are consistent with what the Bible says, all right? And so I'm not worried about it at all. Let's see. All right. Just remember, the scientific method depends on experimentation. The creation of the earth is not something that we can repeat as scientists, okay? We can't repeat that. And so this really scientific method doesn't apply. And so just remember that the scientists haven't proven anything, even based on their own ideology. But I'll just end. Well, this may be one other one. Scientist says, okay, the earth is billions of years, take my word for it. In my view, the Bible says, I created in 6 days, take my word for it. And that's what God says, I believe. But many people today consider a belief in a young earth foolishness, right? Foolishness. And a lot of scientists would tell me that today and can't believe that I would believe this, but I do. But more importantly, I want you to remember this verse, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, all right? But to those of us who are being saved, it is what? The power of God, okay? And so I'll just leave you with that. I appreciate your attention today. Anybody got any questions today? Okay, right here. Yeah. Oh, that's right. A microphone is coming, okay? All righty.
Oh, it takes me a while to get here.
Thank you, Larry.
Thanks,
Okay.
Larry. I have really 3 questions.
Okay.
Where do you find anywhere in the Bible
Yeah.
that God created water?
It says, it doesn't specifically talk about that, but it does say that the Bible was the deep that covered the earth in the beginning. And so I presume that God created the earth as a spinning ball of water, potentially having inorganic materials on the inside. Okay. But I believe that he created water. Water is critical to life. Yeah. It's critical to the temperature of this earth. Mm-hmm. Okay, it is critical to those things. And so water is I could give a talk as a scientist on water itself and how amazing it is and how we couldn't live without it. Okay, but that's a fact that we couldn't live without water. Yeah. Oh. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, good. What is the half-life of lead, since it was mentioned by somebody?
It was lead isotopes. Those are pretty long. I think around 1 billion years, but I'm not sure. Oh. Those are long, but they're more stable than uranium, and so it's not as long. Uranium is about 4 billion years, uranium-238. Lead is much less. Lead might even be less than 1 billion years. It may be in the million-year range, but it's much more stable than uranium. Yeah.
Good. And the final question was, I think you alluded to it. Was the canopy actually ice?
Oh, you're talking about the canopy around the Earth?
Yeah.
Okay. Just for the rest of you, the belief years ago was that there was a canopy around the Earth and that it was water vapor. Okay. That theory has been mostly disproven. Henry Morris, who was one of the leaders of this field and one of the men I have great respect for, now passed away, but that's one thing that I think he had incorrect, okay, because he believed that a lot of the water, that there was water covering the Earth and that was protecting us, okay, but there's not as people, as creation scientists have studied that more, they now believe that there really wasn't a canopy in that sense. What I believe is that layer of water is actually at the edge of the universe. Okay, now I know that's crazy. Look at Psalm 147, 148, something like that, and take a look at that and see what you think. But I believe that actual water that was separated out, I believe it's actually at the edge of the universe. Okay, we can't know that, but just based on the scripture, I think that's a likelihood. Yeah, likelihood. Yeah, sure. There's no over here, Larry, to my right.
Thank you, Alan. It was really a very interesting presentation. I have a question for you. How do you respond to Christians who talk about 2 Peter, a day is like 1,000 to the Lord, and 1,000 is like a day?
They like to leave out the second part of that phrase. Okay, they talk about, they say, a day is like 1,000 years. And I said, okay, read the next part. It says 1,000 years is like a day. What I think that means is that what the point of that verse is that God is not bound by time, okay? That he sees everything. God is timeless. I believe God created time in the beginning, okay? As a matter of fact, I think that phrase, in the beginning, is a hint to us that God created time at the same time that he created matter and space and light. And so he is not bound by time. So for him, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. But that doesn't mean that we aren't bound by time. We're inside of time. Okay, and so again, I probably should have started with this, but time isn't even really constant itself. Okay, now, you may want to turn off your ears now because this may blow your mind. Okay, time is actually not constant. Albert Einstein predicted this years ago, and he's turned out to be right. Okay, that time passes differently depending on the gravitational field. And so time passes differently at sea level than it does at the top of Mount Everest. Okay, now that's hard to imagine. Okay, and so time is actually relative. Okay, and so I believe the 6,000 years is as measured on the earth. I don't know what the time as measured on some distant star would be. Okay, but I believe time measured as we measured on the earth is roughly 6,000 years. And so, but again, time is not that constant thing that we think about. It is for us because there's only a few microseconds a year difference between the top of Mount Everest and the sea level. But it actually matters when they're doing GPS location now. They have to correct for that, okay, to get the actual positioning on the earth as close as they want to get it. Okay, and so anyway, so I've probably told you more than you want to know, but to me, the purpose of that verse is to remind us that God is not bound by time, and that for him, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. But for us, that's not quite true, because I don't expect to be around in 1,000 years. I might be around tomorrow. I don't know what God has in mind, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be around in this physical body in 1,000 years. Okay, does that make sense? Okay.